Welcome to the Counter Narrative Podcast, a show designed to change the way we talk and think about education. By sharing stories of successes and triumphs, we aim to challenge the dominant narrative that often negatively portrays our disenfranchised populations. I'm your host, Charles Williams, an educator for 15 years, a current school principal in Chicago, and an educational consultant. Let's get started. Hey listeners, before we jump into the show, I wanted to tell you about the Equip to Achieve EQ and Remote Learning Summit, which will be held from April 8th through the 11th. Now, this is a can't-miss opportunity for those seeking strategies, information, and inspiration on everything from parenting and teaching in the digital age to addressing social isolation through the lenses of emotional intelligence and social and emotional learning. And the best part? You don't even have to leave your house to attend. We weren't prepared for the impacts of COVID-19 on our educational system, but this virtual event promises to bridge the gaps and equip and empower attendees with the knowledge and skills to do better in 2021 and beyond. Now, here's the best part. Registration for this 4-day event would normally cost you over $200. But if you use the link found in the show notes, you can get full access to this entire conference for only $100. That's over 50% off. So be sure to register today by using the link in the show notes or on any of my other sites. In this episode, I chat with Katie Kinder, who has been an educator since 2006. She believes that life is fun and that learning should most definitely be fun. As a Teacher of the Year, Top 5 District Finalist, OKC Rotary Teacher of the Month, a guest on the Oklahoma State Department's Ed Talk series, and a Top 100 Educator in Oklahoma on Twitter, Katie has learned a trick or two in the classroom. So be sure to check her out, have some fun, and hook your students from day one. During our conversation, we discussed the importance of allowing students to see themselves in their work. While Katie is a huge fan of Edgar Allan Poe, she also knew that her students should be exposed to poets such as Maya Angelou, especially when so many of her students didn't even recognize this prolific author. Like so many others, she pushes back on the idea of doing things the same way simply because, and even challenges those using the current pandemic as an excuse for not making needed change. Katie puts actions behind her words of, don't expect your kids to do what you aren't willing to do yourself, by trying to develop a new district-wide approach to PD, one that would turn her classroom into a living workshop where teachers could witness the implementation of strategies in real time. I guarantee this episode will have you hooked. Enjoy. Hello, Katie, and welcome to the Counter Narrative Podcast. I'm so excited that we were finally able to sit down and do this thing. I know that life has happened so many different times when we've rescheduled, so I'm very excited to be able to actually have you on board. How are you doing today?
Yes, I'm good. Hi, Charles Williams. I'm fangirling a little bit because I really love your podcast. And so I am just giddy about being here. So thank you for having me.
Well, Katie, you are already now my favorite guest, so thank you.
I need your autograph.
So Katie, before we jump into this, if you could do us a favor and just talk to the audience a little bit, introduce yourself, let them know who you are, what you're doing in education, and maybe something interesting about yourself.
Okay. So my journey to education was not conventional. And so I grew up with an educator, and it's just kind of in my blood here. But my mom, Cindy Him, who is an educator in Tulsa, and she is a principal and a superintendent and is an absolute rock star. And I went to college thinking I was not wanting to be her. And I got my degree in journalism and public relations. And so this is my second career. And I spent some years fundraising and doing event planning for a local charity. And one of our national sponsors was the DECA kids. And Charles, when I would pull up to a school and my heart would just pitter pat, and my very best days were with my DECA kids. And so I reluctantly called my mom and said, "Oh, I've missed my call." And she's like, "Yeah, I know." She goes,
like we've been waiting for you to figure it out, right?
Right. And so I went back and I got my teaching certificate, and I went ahead and just did English because I loved my English teachers. I was good at it. And I thought, okay, this is what I'm going to do. So the very first time I stepped into a classroom, I had never even seen somebody teach before. So I really kind of did my own journey as far as like, I started just craving education on it. So I would go, and it was at Putnam City Original back in 2005. So that dates me a little bit. And I just started to go and watch some of these rock star teachers teach. And I started researching, and I got a hold of Ron Clark, and Ron Clark's, Essential 55. And, you know, I was kind of teaching my kids the way that I had been taught, which was in straight rows and read from the book, like sitting on a stool of drool. That's what he called it. I just like gasped, and I was like, oh my gosh, he's talking about me. And so I started to change, and I started gamifying my room, and I started, you know, collaborative groups and things like that. And that's when I got a hold of Dave Burgess. Do you know Teach Like a Pirate at all?
I do. I'm a huge fan.
Okay. So I started teaching like a pirate. I just like, it was like almost like the Bible to me, like for teaching. I was like, of course, like what lessons do you have that you could sell tickets to? You've got some teachers that are out there like, well, it's not my job to be entertaining. Yeah, it is. Because I mean, if your kids are engaged and you love your kids and you want them to do well, because you're competing with video games and sports and, you know, music. And if you're just teaching like they did 50 years ago, then you're not going to grab your kids in 2021, you know? And so I started to change, and I absolutely love it. I found myself in 8th grade English at Kenneth Cooper Middle School for many, many years. And I took my walls and I draped up, you know, blackout curtains when I was teaching Edgar Allan Poe. I had fake candles all around. I would swoop around my room, wrapping curriculum around authors that don't look like me, because my students come to me and they don't look like me. And I want them to see people who look like them. So I am wrapping curriculum around Langston Hughes, and we have a poetry candle of power that we're talking into, and it's not a real candle, it's fake, but you know, and I love them, and it's absolutely my calling. And just this last year, when the pandemic hit, and I'll cry, Charles Williams, how many, 5 minutes in, when the pandemic hit and I didn't get to say goodbye to my kids, because it was not even on my radar that I would not be coming back after spring break. And I didn't get to say goodbye to my kids. And I was heartbroken because I feel like they're my babies, and I worry about them and I love them. And so I took a different job this year, and I'm an instructional coach at a different middle school, Hefner Middle School. And it's very intriguing to me because I get to watch people teach. It's, of course, not in a typical setting because we are on the AB schedule. And I was hopeful that maybe I've done some speaking and some consulting, and I thought maybe I could help teach teachers and love the teachers. But I will say I really miss kids. So that's kind of my journey into education. And I know that like there are some teachers that I teach with now that teach like a pirate, and they haven't been able to do some of those things. And it's heartbreaking.
So Katie, I appreciate you sharing, you know, that this trajectory. And, I connect with it because in many of the same ways, I followed a very similar pathway. It always surprises me when I sit down or I should say it surprises them. It humors me when I sit down with an educator and they kind of have that glint in their eye and like, how did you get into education? And I'm
Right.
like, this wasn't my first choice. Right. And
Right.
they're like, wait, what? Uh, but we're so glad, that we have educators like you doing the work that you're doing because it is necessary, right? We go in and we automatically just kind of do what we know, right? So the fact that you were willing to say, hey, wait a second, something about this isn't right, right? There's these other modalities of teaching and really changing the system.
Yeah,
And I
absolutely.
want to be a part of that. And so, it's one thing to read those books or to watch, people at conferences and you're like, uh-huh, uh-huh, right? But it's a whole different thing to put it into action. And so, again, I want to say thank you, for actually creating those environments, right, for your students where now they're no longer sitting on those quote stools of
So
drool, right?
cool. Oh my gosh, yes. Well, and it is. I mean, and I've been to conferences where they're like, well, how do you have the energy to do that and run around your room and play music? I say to them, you're going to be tired whether you're sitting barking at kids. You're going to be tired if you're swooping around your room with a poetry candle of power. You're going to be tired. So you might as well like metaphorically drop that mic every single day and every single hour. Is it hard to bring the same kind of energy to sixth hour that it is in first and second hour? Absolutely. But I just feel like our kids deserve that. And it's very much a call on my heart to be that kind of teacher.
Kitty, I love that what you just said. You're going to be tired regardless, right?
Absolutely.
So where do you plan to spend that energy, right? To fight back and push back and just be draining and not get anything out of it? Or are you going to be exhausted at the end of the day because you've created an amazing educational experience for your students and watching them skyrocket and soar and bloom into these amazing individuals that we know that they can be?
Right. Exactly. And I kind of feel like sitting and barking at kids, that's way more draining than having fun with these kids and loving these kids and watching them get it and providing that kind of experience for your kids. And I just think it's, as far as management goes, all of that, like I love them and I'm going to bring it every single day and they know it.
So, Katie, I want to ask, and I know you've made this transition, but either within the role that you're in now, or even recently within your teaching role, we talk about the need to change the narrative around education, right?
Absolutely.
And I was an ELA teacher for years, and so I know one of the dreads, right? Like, ELA is boring, and especially you mentioned poetry, which whenever I told students we were going to do poetry, they're like, no, right? Like,
Right.
but you mentioned a few things that you did. And so I'm curious if you wouldn't mind diving in and sharing a little bit. How have you tried to change this? Because I caught two things. One was just approaching ELA in a different way altogether. But then the second part, and something you said and connected with me, was this idea of making sure students were being connected with authors who looked and sounded and experienced the same things that they are experiencing and stepping outside of your comfort zone to make sure that they had those exposures. So, would you mind jumping into anything within that spectrum?
Absolutely. Like, so at the very beginning of the year, I do think the first 9 weeks of the year is the most difficult because I really establish a family classroom. Like, I love you too much to allow you to behave this way. And I say it a lot. I love you too much to allow you to behave this way. And of course, by October, I can say, I love you. And they're like, I know you love me too much to allow me to behave this way. So it's kind of my students can't take really big risks until they do feel as if we are a family. And so I start out with some, I start out with some Walter Dean Myers, who I love. And I do, and then we hop into Halloween and we do some just kind of silly, like Edgar Allan Poe and how dark he was. But it's kind of also like, I've got my whole room transformed into a graveyard and this. But by the time we get to about November, I feel like my kids have already taken some big risks and they're ready to take more. And that is when I pull in Maya Angelou. And it shocks me that they don't know who she is. It really does. I have a few, I call them my social justice warriors. A few of them know her, but most of them don't. And I really talk about, I've got, fake candles all around, and I really talk about her life. Because it's one thing to open up the textbook and read an excerpt of I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, right? And it's another thing to tell her story and about how she was horrifically assaulted, how she lived on literal dirt floors, how she stopped talking for 5 whole years. And they just listen with just rapt attention about this phenomenal woman. And then we jump into some of her poems. And the first one we do is Still I Rise. You may write me down in history with your bitter, twisted lies. You may trod me in the very dirt, but still like dust I'll rise. And I get a little emotional. And you very well might have kids in your classroom who've experienced something like that. And they connect with it. And then eventually we get into writing our own poems. And they are the most beautiful poems I've ever read in my life. And these kids are 13. And they first journal about something hard that they've been through. And then from that, they create a poem. And every year I put them in a poetry competition, creative communications, and they even have like cash prizes. And my kids get published. But here are these giant 250-pound, 6'4" football players crying in my class. And because they feel so safe, you have the other, child grabbing tissue and placing it on their desk saying, it's going to be okay. I've been there. And so that's the kind of thing that I create for my kids. And I always go first. I always say in education, like, don't ever expect your kids to do something that you aren't willing to do yourself. And so my daughter actually was born with several visual impairments, and she is legally blind, and she'll never drive a car. She can see kind of up close, like she can read large print, but I just put her she's 13. I just put her on a waiting list to get a guide dog. And so I write a poem about her and I read it. And then 4 years ago, I lost my very best friend. And I wrote a poem about that. And most of the time I can't get through them without tearing up a little. And I have kids raising their hands saying, well, I'll read the rest of it for you, Miss Kinder. Like, I've got you. And they're just precious. And so then if I'm vulnerable, then they can be too. And those are the kinds of things that I do for my kids.
Katie, I think one of the things that you mentioned here, is the idea of allowing students to really understand the author behind the words, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So often, right? Poetry, it's like, it's old, it's boring, it's
right.
But when they start to realize that person who wrote those words, this was their life, these are the things they went through, and they start to connect, those words take on meaning, right? It's much easier to understand, the symbolism within the words, as opposed to just, all right, guys, let's identify the similes and metaphors. And
oh my God. Like 100%. Yes.
And I can't help but think, I recently stumbled across something, and I don't know if you've seen it, but I was very upset with myself. And I know I've talked about this a few different times, that I discovered August Wilson this past winter break. I'm a grown man of color who has been in theater, and I discovered August Wilson this past winter break. And I was angry about the fact that I just discovered who he was. And I, of course, went down this rabbit hole with him, and I discovered there was this August Wilson competition called Giving Voice. And I was, while you're watching it, and I would encourage you, if you haven't seen it yet,
I
while
haven't.
you're watching it, you see the students really connecting with the story behind the story,
Sure.
right? And they even talk about like, this means something to me because I can see myself in this, right?
Absolutely.
And it we don't have to connect all the time to the traditional, right? The classics, the canon, right? Because our students don't get it because they don't see themselves
In
in
it.
it. And
Yes.
I tell teachers all the time when they're looking at the standards and the skills, I said, nowhere in any of these standards or skills are there titles of works, right? There
Right.
nowhere does it say you have to read, when it talks about poetry, it doesn't say you have to read, Robert Frost, right?
Right.
Nothing against him,
100%. Yes.
right? But
Right. Right. We love him. Yeah.
yeah, but so I love the fact that you're stepping out, and especially the fact, and this is going to lead us right into this next part here, where you said don't expect your kids to do something that you aren't willing to do yourself.
Yeah.
Right? Like to say, I'm going to write poetry and I'm going to share this with you. I'm going to be open and honest and vulnerable with you because I expect you to do the same thing with me. And so, Katie, I want to ask, especially now as a coach, what are some of the obstacles that you've seen where teachers are really afraid or maybe unwilling or maybe just even don't know how to really push this, right? And how can they change that narrative? What are some of the struggles you've seen?
Charles, it's really hard. I don't, the worst thing in education, I think that you can say is, but we've always done it this way. And I'm sure, but we've always read this or I'm like, but why? Why aren't we throwing ourselves into Amanda Gorman's poem? Like, why aren't we living that with her? Why aren't we looking at Kwame Alexander and like Jason Reynolds, like all of these people who are alive and with us and currently creating. And but we've always taught Robert Frost. Why like that? And some of it is as a coach now, because like my classroom was my world, right? Like that was what, as a teacher, it should be. But now I'm getting to see all kinds of different aspects of the classroom, but I just don't know. It's new to me. And so I'm still learning. And I don't know how much of it is I'm scared of COVID, so I can't do this, or I've never done it that way and I'm never going to do it that way. And I don't, honestly, Charles, I don't know how to change it other than just being relational. We were virtual for 9 full weeks, which allowed me to really pour into the staff at my current school. I loved on them. I gave them presents. I wrote them cards. So instead of it's a gift. So now that we've got kids back on this hybrid schedule, I think they'll take my word a little bit more because, that's what we do with students, right? We pour into them relationally and love them. And so I'm hopeful that come August that I can really start doing some PD and they'll listen to me instead of just being like, oh yeah, whatever, that's just your personality. I'm never going to do that. And I'm actually hopeful. And if my principal is listening, I'm hopeful they'll give me a class or two and not just be PD for my building, but for the whole district, and that they could come and they could watch me teach and spend the day with me and ask me questions and then go implement that in their own classroom. So that's my goal.
That would be extremely powerful. Just something that you said there was, I don't want to just do PD, right? I don't want to just come to you and say, hey, this is how you do it. Like, give me a class and allow people to come and see this thing in action.
100%. Yeah. Like, see
Yeah,
how
wow. I'm making some notes here.
Okay. I even went as far as I've made a proposal for my district and just saying, you could put in 2-way mirrors, just have them come in and see what an innovative class looks like and what, I have been able to in my career. Like, I can take a gang member who does not want to open up, scared, or tough, and by the end of the year, they are absolutely reciting poetry into a fake candle and crying. Like, how do you take a kid like that in August and by Christmas that they're doing that? And people would ask me and I'd be like, well, it's just, I love them. That's what I'd say. I love them. And, I hope to be able to show that to my baby teachers, because that's what we need. When our new baby teachers come to us, they need a wave of innovation in the classroom. And so we've got to get them mentors who can help them. And so I'm really hopeful for that, and stay tuned, Charles Williams, because we'll see what happens.
I'm literally like jotting down notes because, I'm writing a book right now, a little plug here for myself.
Yes.
And it's my show. I could plug myself,
You
right?
can do what you want, Charles Williams.
But the reason behind this book, right, is we talk a lot about the final product. Right? When you come see me at a conference and I'm sharing with you, hey, this is my idea, right? You're seeing the final polished product. But the reality is, and not just for our new teacher, even for our seasoned teachers, our veteran teachers, it's not always like that. So if I can come and see you in action, right? PD in action. That's
Absolutely.
my working title right now.
Right. I like it.
I can see those hiccups, right? I can see that Katie she's not on 10 all the time. She's going to have dips. I can see that kid that she showed us pictures of that was reciting poetry. Like, he didn't come in and day one, he just grabbed that candle, right? It is a process. There are struggles. There's frustration. It takes time. But this is the natural course of teaching. And so I really like that idea of you saying, you know what, I don't want to just show you that final polished product. I want you to see it in action. And you could pop in at any given point and you're going to see the good things. And you're also going to see the bad things that are necessary to get to those good things.
Absolutely. 100%. And we have to rely on each other. I think teachers too, they graduate from school, they do their student teaching, and then they go and they sit in their room for 30 years. Like, no, we need to rely on each other. And I think that, I taught with a PLC partner, somebody else who taught 8th grade English. And I had 150 of the kids and she had 150 of the kids, and we planned together. And she was one of my most favorite people ever. But she taught very differently than me, but she was still very effective. She was very zen. She was very, like, you like to listen to her voice, where I was very much like in your face. And we just believed, like, whoever happened into our class that's the way it was supposed to be. And if, God got it wrong, we would switch them out. If they needed somebody super engaging and running around, if they needed more zen, then we'd switch them around. And I think we do as educators, we need to start thinking about, they're not just my kids, they're our kids, they're our kids. Sometimes educators can be very territorial.
Just a bit.
Yeah. And so they're like, you got a new baby teacher that's like, I need some help, or I need this. Like, well, you can't have my poem. Well, you can't use that. Or, that's not the way we do it here. Like, and I just think that we've got to get out of that mindset.
Katie, I know that we've talked a lot about these things. So I'm going to try to maybe see if we can take some of it and move it into this next section here of this idea of
I'm ready.
Tips, right? I'm sure there are people listening who are like, you know what, Katie, that's awesome. I want to do things like that. I want to be that teacher. What would you say to them? If there were a couple of things that I can do to become an innovative teacher, create some fun lessons, right? Like, so my kids are not sitting, and I'm going to keep coming back to this, on stools of drool.
Yeah.
What are some tips or strategies that you would suggest?
I mean, my first thing would say to get a hold of Teach Like a Pirate. I really would. Like, I just read it and I made notes on it, and I would go onto the YouTubes and I would be researching him, Dave Burgess. And I love Dave Burgess. Hi, Dave Burgess. He knows I'm a fangirl of his too. And I would I would watch Ron Clark and see the things that he's doing and how he's taught teachers. Like teachers go to the Ron Clark Academy and then they get to go back into their schools and see and try to implement that. So that's what I would do. Or find your rock star teachers in your building, your teacher of the year, your people who win awards, and go and watch them. I know that you have grading and I know you have planning and I know the state and the district put a lot of paperwork on your back, but it's worth it. It's worth it to go and watch somebody who has a lot of passion and makes their class really fun and engaging, but also rigorous. And so that's my very first thing I would tell one of my teachers. Yes, I want to do this, and then as behaviors or something arises, they can go back to that teacher and say, well, what do you do when this happens? And of course, ideally, that teacher, the innovative teacher, would come and help the baby teacher, would come into their class. And I think as administrators and principals and instructional coaches, we have to provide that for our teachers. We've got to cover their classes. We've got to make sure that they have that opportunity.
So, Katie, first of all, I don't know if you've heard about this, but Dave just released his own podcast.
I don't know about it. Tell me.
Yes. So, I just saw it in my email, so I'm curious. I want to go check him out. But I saw that and I was like, okay, like like you, I'm a huge fan. In fact, I purchased Teach Like a Pirate for all of my teachers. That was something that we read over the summer. And when we came back, we had like a whole pirate themed like orientation.
Love it.
We did a pirate escape room. So I, definitely embraced that idea. And so, I guess I'm a fan guy. Like, I don't know.
You're a fan guy. We see you, Dave Burgess. We're going to have to like tag him in this when it gets published.
Absolutely. His ears are ringing right now. But as an administrator, I have to agree with you. And I just mentioned this in one of my parking lot thoughts. Administrators, I know I asked Katie to give tips to educators, and this one cannot be overlooked. We have to allow our staff to do these things. We cannot say we want amazing things to happen, but stay in your rooms, teach from bell to bell, right? And now do all your planning and like. We have to create those opportunities. We have to provide the support in order for them to do these things, right? So I'm glad you mentioned that, because the one thing that bothers me all the time is I hear the word relationships. It's used all the time, but it's almost always used between teachers and students, right? But very rarely do we talk about the need for teachers to build relationships with their other teachers. And I'm glad you brought that up. And even more so for the administrators in the buildings and beyond to build relationships with your teachers, because that has to be throughout the building. There has to be these positive relationships, which will translate obviously into this culture of learning. So, these amazing things can happen. Otherwise, like you said, everybody goes into their classrooms, they sit down. These are my kids. These are my lessons. Mm-hmm. I'm going to do my thing. Right.
Yes.
So
yes.
Thank you.
I am lucky enough that I work for Putnam City Schools, and they want us to lean in to some of these hard things that are happening in our country, even in the last month. So Putnam City just recently this year hired an equity coordinator, and she's leaning into these things. Like when there was the Capitol riots, and when George Floyd, like our students are coming to us knowing exactly what happened. So ignoring it and teaching Robert Frost, guess what? They're not listening to that. And I think there are some districts here in Oklahoma that like teachers got in trouble for teaching what was happening, but not our district. Our district encourages us to lean into that. So I think having a district like that, and then having an admin team, which at Hefner Middle School, we have a wonderful admin team that supports teachers and loves them. And so I think that's first, you got to find the right place. You got to find the right place to teach.
Absolutely. Well, shout out to Putnam City. You guys sound like you're doing some amazing things. So please keep up the work. And, I'm not sure if you've ever connected, but I have a friend from out in Oklahoma, Andre Dowdy.
I just listened. I mean, not just. I listened to his when you put it out. I fangirl with him too. I messaged him about his podcast with you because I was bawling listening to him because he told some amazing stories, and he told that story about the little girl who called him and had the baby in the closet, and you know, as educators, we do this long enough, we have situations like that. And the fact that she would call him to help her was powerful and broke my heart. So I messaged him and said, hi, I just listened and it was so good. So yes, he's wonderful.
So yeah, I want to say thank you for connecting with us. But before we're wrapping up here, and I feel like I could just, I'm stopping myself from teasing all of these different things out because I think instead I'd rather just have another episode at some point.
Absolutely. I would love to.
So I want to ask, because I'm sure that there are people listening that are like, Katie sounds amazing. She sounds wonderful. I want to learn more about her and Putnam, right? And her fangirls, right? So how can listeners find you?
Well, I'm on Twitter. I love Twitter for, being able to promote the positive. I think we have to relentlessly promote the positive on our campuses. So you can find me on Twitter. And I started a blog because I was missing kids so much. I was missing my lessons. COVID has really, I think we're going to be looking at some trauma because of this pandemic. And so I started a blog where I don't want, like, I've heard teachers be like, I just bought something on Teachers Pay Teachers. And then I bought another thing on Teachers Pay Teachers. I'm like, I don't want teachers to pay teachers. I want them to have it all for free. And it's the Engaged English class is the name of the blog. And I post the lessons, everything for free here. I've got anywhere from Jackie Robinson to Walter Dean Myers to Kwame Alexander to, I just did a lesson about Amanda Gorman. And so come and take them. Do not pay teachers. Get it for free. And I'm also, I speak sometimes at some conferences, and I hope that picks back up when the world is normal again. So please, yes, reach out. I would love to connect with you. And if you have a question, I feel like my job is, yes, to help the teachers in my school and my district, but also let's help everyone. So if you need something, or you need a lesson, or you need help, or you need some words of encouragement, let me know.
I love that idea, Katie, this idea of educators without borders, right? And
yes, love that.
A little plug to my friends at School Rubric, because that's their thing. But, the idea that we don't have to just stick to our schools or to our district, we've seen that. Like, you and I are nowhere near one another, and yet we're doing this, right?
Yes.
And so there's no reason people cannot connect across the country, heck, across the world, to be able to say, how can we best serve our students? So
absolutely. Yes.
Well, Katie, I want to say again, thank you so much for coming onto the show. This was an amazing, amazing time spending here with you. But more importantly, I want to say thank you for all of the great work that you're doing, not just in your own classroom now, but trying to recreate that across the district. So hopefully we have many, many more classrooms like that. And of course, right, impacting that many more students. So I want to just say thank you, thank you.
Thank you, Charles Williams. If we ever see each other in person, we can take a selfie and put it on Twitter.
Absolutely. Once we're able to be at those conferences without masks and everything, right? Like
100%. The selfies going on there. Thank you so much for having me.
Katie, you take care. We'll talk soon.
Okay, bye.
If you haven't heard about Anchor, it's the easiest way to make a podcast. Don't believe me? Here's 5 reasons why. First, it's free. Second, there's creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. 3, Anchor will distribute your podcast for you, so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcast, and so many more. 4, you can make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. And 5, it's everything you need to make a podcast, all in one place. Download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. I want to thank you for listening to the Counter Narrative Podcast. If you like what you are hearing, please be sure to like and subscribe. The show can be found on Anchor, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, and several of your other favorite platforms. This podcast is also featured on schoolrubric.com, where you can find educational articles, videos, and interviews with educators from around the globe. Be sure to connect with the host and other listeners by following the show on Twitter at the CN Podcast and joining the show's Facebook group. Take care.